This is Chapter 2, Media Literacy in the Digital Age, Part 2. Early Concerns of Media Effects. Over the last century, public concern has arisen about the possible effects of each new medium of mass comm as it has emerged. Concerns about each medium's impact on culture, political processes, children's values, behavior, and morality continue to be at the forefront of these conversations. In the 1920s and 30s, the public became worried about the depiction of sex, violence, and lawlessness in film, and some of the same concerns continue with the operationalization of the video games, augmented reality, and the internet. If anything, people have always been concerned that children especially could be easily influenced by any type of medium that they are exposed to, beginning with books and newspapers to television, video games, and again the internet. In 360 BCE, Plato suggested that children cannot distinguish between what is allegory and what isn't, and opinions formed at that age are usually difficult to eradicate or change. It is therefore of the utmost importance that the first stories they hear shall aim at producing the right moral effect. This may sound familiar given that much of society feels the same way about what children should and should not be exposed to. But we have to question, even if there are clearly images and ideas that children are to not be exposed to, what about the media that they are exposed to? How do we know that all of this is child appropriate and not influencing them in any way? And what about the things that do influence them? Are they okay to influence them? What about the cultural values that are at stake? What do children learn that they learn as children that maybe they shouldn't learn as children? And obviously, this differs based on how you're brought up, where you're brought up, and the region and the cultural values that you have. Before writing was created, we participated in primarily oral cultures that were mnemonic or memory based. This meant that one had to be good at oral communication and public speaking, along with being an awesome storyteller. So, through storytelling, these orators had to use their memory to remember stories and to influence audience because nothing was written down. No record existed of what was said or what was to be said. So, people got away with a lot. As writing developed, some of the same influences took form, only in this case, written text was being interpreted by those who could read and write to those who had not developed an interest or ability in doing so. Thus, children and adults who did not have the capabilities to read and write were often prey of those who could, thus influencing them by what was read to them. Through having to trust the words of another person without being able to interpret them or research them for yourself, it leaves a lot of room for harm and misinformation. We know that historically this has happened with hundreds of thousands of marginalized groups of people, blacks, Native Americans, and other groups, for example, who have communicated in their own languages but not in the same language of their oppressors, which made them victims to physical slavery and mental enslavement and bondage, some of which both groups still suffer from today. Media grammar. As a critical consumer, you must become better familiarized with media grammar, which are the underlying rules, structures, and patterns by which a medium presents itself and is used and understood by the audience. Simplified, this means that each medium within mass comm has its own unique code of language, sounds, and symbols that are used within the communication process and phenomenon. Media grammar then has a profound impact on our understanding of media content, and we become more aware of it when we encounter a new medium whose rules are not yet known. And so when we're thinking about media grammar, we're not looking at grammar in the exact same ways as we would with written grammar or when we're thinking about language and grammar rules. We're talking basically about the rules and structures that kind of dictate how we are to use and how we are to understand each of these mediums collectively as well as individually. Media grammar for print. As your book outlines, this is the case for print media and books, newspapers, and magazines, especially as it concerns the way that we understand the purpose of these mediums and the intent of information that they disseminate. A great example of this can be found in the way that we view print magazines versus online magazines. So consider which version of the magazine is more appealing to you. The same could be applied to actual handheld hard copy books and digital books. What about newspapers? How many of us actually read a newspaper, hold it in our hand, and we flip through the newsprint? Or how many of us actually read the newspaper or subscribe to news online? There's a humongous difference, and we have to be able to use those skill sets that we learn as far as grammar is concerned and how to gather the information and understand the purpose of each of these micro mediums within this genre of print. Radio and recorded music. In the radio and recorded music industry, a different type of media grammar is used, which is primarily based on sound. For instance, radio uses a combination of audio techniques to achieve different ends. These include volume changes, multiple audio tracks, actualities, which are edited audio clips from interviews with people, and voiceovers, an unseen announcer or narrator talking while other activity takes place, either on radio or during a TV scene. And when we think about voiceovers especially, think about the types of voiceovers we have. Is it a man? Is it a woman? Think about if you have an iPhone or you use some type of digital technology, how Siri sounds and how the male version of Siri that they've adapted sounds. And what does that mean? What does that communicate? What does that say about these different recordings and how they operate in our lives and how we're to understand them? And then when we think more about recorded music, it typically conforms to particular stylistic conventions, especially regarding length, less than 5 minutes a song. This is even more pertinent when we consider things like lyricism and cadence in songs. Think about your favorite rapper hip hop artist being covered by a country artist. Would it be successful? What if like Taylor Swift covered a Kendrick Lamar song? What stylistic conventions would she have to attend to be convincing in order to make the cover appealing to hip hop and pop fans alike? And we see this all the time where people will adapt a version of a song from a different music genre to their own. And in most cases it's successful and in some cases it's not. You know, that speaks to our media grammar and what that means. Media grammar in film and television. With film and television, which have shorter histories, we notice that our understanding of what's being communicated is done so with sound, visual language, and images. Lighting, camera angles, editing, and movement also play a large role here. A great example of this could be found in filmmaker Spike Lee's signature free-floating dolly shot, which is found in this bottom picture on the screen from the movie Crooklyn. And you want to consider, you know, with this shot, what is he communicating? Are they actually moving, or is it that the camera and the dolly are helping us to think that they're moving? Do we think we're about to get hit? Or do we understand that we are facing the characters in a movie? All of these things are a part of our media grammar for understanding television and film. As it concerns direct communication with the audience, your book mentions the laugh track, which is a television sitcom device that generates pre-recorded laughter timed to coincide with punchlines and jokes. Of course, this is intentional because it gives you direction on intentional or unintentional joke. And oftentimes you'll see with sitcoms that a laugh track will be embedded to encourage people to laugh in the audience. Sometimes when they do or when they do not, but also sometimes to kind of break the ice. Or if something's corny and someone says it and we are not supposed to laugh at it, we're supposed to still think that it's funny. Again, these are forms of media grammar that are applied to the medium of film and television. Finally, digital media grammar. We are most familiar with the implication of digital media within the digital landscape, which is inclusive of social media, the internet, and email. The use of hypertext, which is found online, is often underlined or set apart typographically from other text. It's the text that is linked by HTML coding to another web page or website to a different part of the same web page. This, along with the ways that access and assess the digital world, are all important components of the media grammar that we use in that space. Accordingly, then, the digital landscape will continue to evolve and we'll find new ways and easier ways of doing this. Your textbook briefly mentions the work of Canadian scholar Marshall McLuhan, who has coined the terms global village and phrases like the medium is the message or the medium is the massage. But what does that really mean? What McLuhan meant then by all of this is that whatever medium we are engaged in or whatever medium we're using has more influence oftentimes than the actual message that is being disseminated based on the fact that we're using a certain type of media grammar to understand and to be able to gather the messages that are being disseminated and even create messages of our own. He suggests that what is being disseminated and connects to this definition of the global village helps us to establish the idea that we are all having collective and individual experience with media in rhizomatic, aka simultaneous ways. In this quote that I have in the picture here, he says, "We shape our tools and then our tools shape us." And I think this is a great example of how we continue to participate in this cyclical construction with the media and how the media continues to impact us. You can't have one without the other. So, what are the implications of commercial media? This is really important. So, the economic factors influence the way that we gain access and understand the media. They don't just exist on their own, they're still businesses, they're still organizations. As it concerns media literacy, we must recognize that the media is a business, and just like any other organization or business, a profit is at stake and decisions have to be made. Within the organization of the media, this is linked to advertising, understanding what products and companies will pay to reach consumers, cost effectiveness, figuring out who to get the most from and how to get the most bang out of your buck while still being able to get the job done. And then finally, information dissemination, meaning what gets communicated to consumers and what gets left out. This becomes even more complicated when we think about the relation to local, national, and international audiences. You will often see that a story that's shared locally has a certain type of framing, right? We have certain signs, symbols found in semiotics that are a part of that story, and we have to utilize certain types of media grammar to interpret the meaning of that story. You could take the same story and apply it on a national or an international story or level, and it would be a completely different story. Or maybe parts of the local version are not going to be included because of the demographic that's watching it or viewing or getting access to that. Organizations like News Corp, who are owned by Rupert Murdoch, along with a few others, are our leaders in media enterprises and media communication. Thus, those who control the media are also able to control the way that information is shared and understood by consumers. So think about it. If one person is in charge of an organization that is responsible for giving information, they essentially control the information and control the way that we get the information. Again, this is a cyclical process that media organizations and media consumers participate in continuously, willingly, and sometimes subconsciously or against their will. Given this information, we are not only witnessing what some coin as a media monopoly, where information is controlled by certain types of people, typically dominant groups, but through this practice, media organizations have created a media oligopoly, often described as a marketplace in which media ownership and diversity are severely limited and the actions of any single media group affect its competitors substantially. This includes determining the type of content and price of media products for both consumers and advertisers. So, to help you better conceptualize this, think about the bidding process that major networks go through for highly broadcasted events like the Super Bowl and the Olympics. Now consider the type of advertisements and the price points of those advertisements that are displayed during these events.